Hey everybody, welcome to Brainstorm, our series of videos where we talk about prevalent mental health topics. My name is Chelsea Gambles and my pronouns are she, her, and I'm a counselor at SUU, CAPS.
And my name is Tyler Tassin. My pronouns are he, him, his, and I am a mental health support peer at Southern Utah University working for counseling and psychological services. So this channel is meant to be a resource to anyone who wants to learn more about how to improve their own mental wellness, or just anybody who's interested in mental health topics at all. And if it's your first time watching one of our videos, please check out our other ones. They're pretty cool and informative, so hope you'll check those out. But today we are very excited. We're going to be talking about college mental health in general. And so we're very excited today to have Dr. Kurt Hill with us. He's the Director of Counseling and Psychological Services at Southern Utah University. So, Kurt, you want to introduce yourself real quick?
Yeah, sure. My name's Kurt Hill. I've been at Southern Utah University for 20 years now as the Director of Counseling Services. I went to graduate school in and have a Ph.D. in counseling psychology. And that's a really fun and relevant degree for college counseling, because a lot of the focus in counseling psychology is on development, and especially student development, early adult development. And so that was a natural fit to be working in a college counseling center. Let's see, what else is important? It's really fun to work in a college counseling center. College students are a really fun, I think it's just a fascinating and a fun time in life. College students are doing so many important developmental things, just tons of developmental tasks that are really critical to having a long and productive and healthy life. And college students that can kind of successfully confront those tasks, can find creative ways and develop skills to move into adulthood, are really, really fun to work with. From a counseling side, it's a blast to be to work in a college counseling center, because college students are really motivated when they run into issues that create some real distress. They're very motivated to try new things. They're creative in their approaches to life, and that makes it fun to do counseling with them.
Well, thanks, Kurt. I have to stop saying this because I've said this the last couple times, but our viewers are in for a treat today to hear from Kurt. I was trying to think of how to describe like all of the things that I know that Kurt does at CAPS, and it's probably only a third of what I know you do, but it's I think it's impossible to really capture all the things that you do because you wear so many hats. It seems like, but Kurt is basically the person that keeps mental health together at the university. So I feel like you're the one that's kind of thinking about and just overseeing the wellness of the university as a whole, and all of us counselors at CAPS. Kurt's a big reason why I came full-time at CAPS. I had a pretty cushy job in private practice, and Kurt's just, I think, really gifted at helping people be their best and motivating, mentoring people to really pursue their interests and be their best in their career and in their identity as a student and their role as a student. So you guys are lucky to learn from him today. Me and Tyler are too, not to speak for you, Tyler, but I know where. But before we get started, I'm just going to give you one quick disclaimer, the one we always do, which is just that the purpose of this series of videos is not to take the place of any mental health counseling or the direction or treatment guidelines of any of your counseling that you're receiving. We are going to link resources below, including crisis resources if you are needing to access individual or other types of counseling, including the group counseling that we offer and or crisis resources. We'll also link any relevant discussion that we have today. But just make sure that you're following the guidelines of your own mental health treatment and access resources if you need them. And also that the opinions and views expressed today are those solely of our speaker. They're not necessarily the views of SUU and or the podcast. And I think that's it. I think we can jump right in. Yeah.
Yeah. I think so. So we have some questions prepared to talk about with Kurt. And so I'm just going to go into our first question. So how many students are usually experiencing mental health problems on a campus, or maybe specifically at SUU?
Yeah, that's a great question, and it's a question on a lot of people's minds. There is kind of a general. There's been a lot of articles about college mental health and emerging adult mental health over the last 7-8 years in lots of places, and so it's a question that's on a lot of people's minds. Let me give you a little background first. A lot of the information that we have and data that we collect is based on some really good research that's coming out, well, from several places, out of Penn State University and out of the University of Michigan. The group that's working out of the University of Michigan are called the Healthy Minds Network, and we are a part of this network. And so the data we collect on questions like this, on student mental health and development, is grounded in lots of terrific research that's really well designed. And we can compare SUU students with students around the state and students around the country. And so a lot of this information is coming from that, from research we're conducting here on campus. Recent research, we completed the Healthy Minds Network survey, so we have a good idea of what mental health rates, problems, and areas of strength are. We completed this research just last year, so this is accurate data, it's up-to-date data, and it's fun because we can compare it with folks around the country. So here's some highlights from that. There's lots of data. I'll try and hit the highlights. We know from the national sample that about almost 40% of students are experiencing some sort of significant mental health issue. And that during the course of any given year, that like not everybody experiences really high levels of distress all the time. That comes and goes. But we know over the course of an academic year that about 50% of students fall into a category of where they're really struggling with mental health issues at any one point. And that number is a little higher at SUU. As I read, I'm going to read these national statistics, and in every single category, SUU students come in several percentage points higher. So we know that SUU students, and we've known this for a long time, and students in the Intermountain West generally, this is true for them as well. But SUU students experience distress at higher levels than the national sample in every category except for issues with substance abuse. But those numbers are climbing for SUU students. So here's a few of the highlights. We know that about 14% of students during the time of the survey were experiencing severe symptoms of depression. That's a lot. That's, if you think of 12,000 students at SUU, that's a lot of students. 10% of students in the national sample were struggling with severe anxiety. And a lot of these students are experiencing both. And if you can combine depression symptoms with anxiety symptoms, that becomes pretty debilitating pretty fast. It makes it hard to most students that are experiencing both or either one are going to struggle with attention and concentration. They're going to struggle with being organized. You're just not going to have a whole lot of energy to put into different areas of life, including school. Let's see, a couple of other interesting points. This was interesting. In the national sample, about 9% were eating with, or were struggling with possible eating disorders. So they were having a number of what would you call it? Just symptoms that are usually based in anxiety, that have a strong anxiety component to them, but there's a lot of concern and even some compulsions and some obsessiveness around body image and eating. And that takes a lot of energy. And then let's see, what else? On this one, maybe this is the last one that we'll hit in this section, but about 11% of students were having serious thoughts of attempting suicide. That's a very high number. We've seen that increasing around the country. We've seen that number increase, the depression number increase, and the anxiety numbers increase around the country over the last 10 years. And we have really solid data on that. And at SUU, we see those same trends. Those numbers are increasing. And it's a pretty big concern for those of us in the counseling center, but certainly for student leaders, for administration, and for the families of students.
Wow.
Yeah, I don't know. Any thoughts about that?
Yeah, the statistics and what you were saying about students who are experiencing both depression and anxiety, for the majority of the students that I meet with as a mental health support peer, almost all of them are experiencing both. And it really, really does make getting anything done in their classes so hard, because they're losing motivation to do things because they're feeling so depressed, but then they're also just feeling so anxious and stressed because they're not doing the things that they want to do. And then it just is a downward spiral that they're both contributing to, and it's just so hard for the students to deal with.
Yeah,
it's crippling.
Yeah, that's a good word for it in a way, because I think that everybody in life, college students included, deal with all kinds of stresses. Like every day, we've got some sort of stress or something that can create kind of some anxiety and some feelings of being maybe a little bit overwhelmed. But for the most part, human beings do pretty well with that. College students do great with that, in fact. And there's kind of periods of more distress, and then we kind of, then I think we address what's creating that. We get homework done. We complete a big project. We manage a difficult situation at work or with a roommate or whatever, and then that distress decreases and we function pretty well. But when those levels stay high over a long period of time, it creates all kinds of issues physiologically and certainly psychologically. And then when it stays high, it becomes kind of a priority, an unwanted priority. And what I mean by that, it kind of trumps other activities that we're doing and want to do and need to do in life. It becomes a central focus because at those times we're trying to survive. And other priorities like school and work and relationships start to fall away. So that's the real challenge is for a college student is, can you, as those levels get high and stay high, can you find some ways and get some help a lot of times to reduce those levels of distress and get on with other important developmental tasks?
I've already read this survey that you sent out, and yet it was quite jarring to hear even just, the difference between our local students and national samples. And I imagine our viewers' next thought is why, right? Like why is our local students higher by any percentage, and what contributes to that? And I guess maybe they might be wondering, is there a difference between college students stress levels and non-college students, and what other thoughts do you have about maybe the why?
Yeah, great. Good questions. And I think that's a natural next question is why. We don't have as much research on individuals in the kind of that 18 to 25 year age group who are not in college. We have a lot better data on college students, but there have been a couple of good research projects around that. And it kind of looks like rates of distress are really similar. It used to be believed that students in college were a lot better off than their peers who were not in college, but research is starting to suggest that's not the case. And that actually that may be a change in the last 8 to 10 years in the United States generally, but we see similar things in Europe. So maybe there's some broad cultural issues at play that's affecting emerging adults' mental health. And you kind of could draw some of your own conclusions around that, just thinking about what are some of the big questions and concerns and anxieties that young people are dealing with as they're coming into adulthood. The world is changing, and it's changing relatively fast. We know that social media has been a big game changer in how we see ourselves and how we see the world. Immediate access to information about the world. The way media kind of probably focuses in on the sort of headlines that are the most attention grabbing. And, those sorts of things are probably all having a significant impact. Also probably changes in the economy and in how the work and the sense of like how work and careers develop. So I think that's an issue in that I think a lot of people coming into adulthood are really grappling with questions of like, am I going to be secure in the world? Am I going to have health coverage? Am I going to be able to support myself? I'm going to be able to support a family. These are big questions that all generations have dealt with, but I think the rate of change has increased very significantly in the world. And so I think the questions are more front and center. So these are some of the things that I think folks are struggling with. And I hear it all. One of the reasons I think is I have data that suggests this, but as a counselor, I'm talking with students every day about these very issues. And so have a lot of anecdotal evidence that would support those people. Yeah. This was an interesting piece of data that comes from this Healthy Mind study. And I'm going to shift directions a little bit here on reasons why I think this is happening. We know about 50% of college students, maybe a little bit under 50%, are actually functioning really well. The college environment seems to work really well for them. The supports that are already here and that have traditionally been available in college work particularly well for those students. So about 48% roughly of students do well. They're happy, they're connected, they feel like they can kind of grow and develop in really creative and fun ways. And that's great. But the 48 to 52% of students that aren't functioning as well really aren't functioning well at times anyway. And so the why for me is like, what's the difference between those two groups? And in my years of experience and being pretty tuned into the literature and reading research and talking with colleagues and with students, I think it comes down to, I think a lot of it anyway can be explained by students who seem to be functioning the best in college are the students that are the most privileged. They're the students that have resources coming into college. They're students that have good support, that know how to make connections. They already have probably pretty good relationship skills and psychological skills. that's not necessarily because they earned that, or they did all the hard work and deserve that. It's because they've been, for the most part, really lucky in life, right? They have good resources backing them up already. And that's great. That's what we want for every student, right? That's a wonderful thing to have that type of privilege. And that doesn't mean those students still don't work hard, but they just have, like when they run into a real difficulty in life, which is normal, right? We run into difficulties and challenges and limits pretty frequently. They have backups. They can talk to a parent. They can talk to good friends. They know how and feel like they have the right to go talk to a professor and to access help. And those students do the best. So the big question is why then do we have so many students and so many people in our communities who don't have those resources? I think it's a huge question. It's a huge problem. And that is where the work of all of us on university campuses really needs to be focused.
Yeah, and I'm wondering if that concept applies to the question as to why SUU's numbers are slightly elevated. Are we slightly less privileged than the national samples?
Yeah, in a nutshell, absolutely. Students in Utah generally are less privileged than the national sample, there's probably a few reasons why. Utah has a lot more students, and this goes generally for Utah, Idaho, Wyoming, Montana, Nevada. Students in the Intermountain West have less money. There is less money here than on the coasts, for example. Students in Utah, a lot of students come from relatively rural areas where access to services, just normal developmental services, skill building services in the K through 12 system are pretty thin, frankly, compared to other places in the United States. And so yes, we know that individuals generally in our area have reduced services or have reduced access to services, just general services, lots of developmental services, including mental health services. In addition to that, when a student comes to a rural place like Cedar City, there are lots of benefits to being in a rural area. One of the cool things about SUU is there is on campus a sense of community. There are people that work at SUU that want to work at a place like this and like students and want to see students develop and be happy. And those are all good things. And I think students pull together and support each other in a place like SUU really pretty well. However, some of the drawbacks of being in a rural place is just access to services. There are no psychiatrists in Iron County. And there's lots of other services that are really limited or difficult to get into in a place like Cedar City. So there are benefits to being in a place like Cedar City, but drawbacks, especially from a mental health perspective.
Yeah, and I really, as you were talking, I was like, oh yeah, everything you're saying is so true. And I feel very fortunate. I feel like I am one of those students who I came in fairly privileged. Like I have very supportive parents. My first year of college, they just like, you get your head on straight. We're gonna we're basically gonna pay everything for you, and then you can once you're into college and you've got stuff figured out, then you can start looking for a job and start supporting yourself. Mm-hmm. And that made it such a big difference. And it was still so hard. College is just hard. And so I can't even imagine for students that don't have the same resources that I did, how hard it would be. And then also, one of the big things that drew me to SUU was I saw how much the professors and just like all the faculty and staff at SUU care about students and are really trying to help them. But then there is just such a call for mental health services that we just don't have the resources for. You guys at CAPS are so busy all the time. And just like, if you had more resources to help you guys, it would be a game changer. But you guys do so well with what you do have. And it's incredible with what you do. But yeah, students, it's rough right now. But we didn't put this on our kind of what we were going to talk about, but I wanted to ask, how do you think all of the stuff that we've already talked about has been influenced by COVID-19 this year? Because that's changed a lot of stuff, and we may not have like the data for that yet, but what are your like personal thoughts on that?
Yeah, good question. Well, we're starting to get some national data on this and trying to compare that with the data that we're collecting within the state. But yeah, it's early in that process. But it's interesting. Let's talk about privilege again. Individuals with the most privilege are doing the best in COVID. Big surprise. And I just want to make a little comment on how big systems work and how privilege works. When a crisis comes up, it's the people that have the most privilege that get the services the fastest, even though they need the services the least. And so it's just a general comment about how the world works. And if it kind of makes you angry, it probably should. And there's lots of good people out there in the world that are trying to mitigate that and change some of that, by the way. But yeah, a sense of disconnection has been probably the biggest single complaint or concern that we've heard in the counseling center. But I think this is, lots of people on campus have heard this, and it's not just college students. But that's a big issue for sure. I think sometimes disconnection leads to a sense of isolation. And a sense of isolation starts to have big, like pretty significant mental health issues. I'm just trying to think in the college context, what I've been hearing. It has been helpful for some students, maybe for a lot of students actually, to have kind of this hybrid model where I think a lot of students that maybe are doing the best with COVID are students that are able to go to class and then also go back and watch some lectures on Zoom, for example. Students that are doing both, I've talked to lots of students who feel that that's much better than the old way. So maybe some good things are going to come out of Zoom, or not out of Zoom, are going to come out of the pandemic. Things like using Zoom more frequently, recording lectures. But for the most part, some students seem to have adapted to it pretty well, but there's a lot of students that are really struggling with kind of a sense of isolation, and that has some negative mental health impacts. I don't know, like in a nutshell, I'd say that's kind of a good summary of what I'm hearing. We don't know if rates of depression and anxiety have increased a lot. We're not sure. I've seen some anecdotal stuff and some preliminary research that suggests that's probably true, but I'm not sure how true that is for college students. Distress in college students was plenty high before. So I don't know.
That makes sense. I think it's a lot. There's a lot of intersections to each of that. And I would echo the whole isolation piece being the biggest thing that I see as well. And it makes sense that privilege plays a role in how each individual is adapting and coping with that. So moving to do you want to say more about what the economic case for investing in student mental health is, or do you feel like you covered that?
Let's just address that really, really fast. This Healthy Minds Network and some other research projects have, and this is pretty recent, but in the last 10 years have been trying to make the case or the argument for more resources generally for students, especially developmentally focused resources like counseling and prevention skill building resources in addition to counseling. They're trying to make the argument that that has a big impact on retention, graduation rates, and then in the long term on a more productive life. And when we say productive, we're not talking about it in the traditional capitalist way. We're talking about it in a way where it's like you just feel like you're a better, a healthier person, better able to deal with life's challenges, and the argument is that leads to a more productive life. And research is really starting to support that. The Healthy Minds Network has been able to show pretty clearly that if you put $1 million, which is a lot of money, but if you put $1 million into mental health on a campus, you're going to get a 4 or 5 time return just in the time, or 4 or 5 times return. So that will save a university $4 or $5 million just in retention and graduation. You just don't lose those students if you can get them timely resources. And so this is something that administration's very aware of here, that we're working with some of the limitations we have in the state of Utah around higher ed and at SUU to try and increase our impact around mental health on campus. But I think that's kind of what I wanted to say is every dollar you put into mental health, you get probably a 3, 4, or 5 fold return. And that's good for the whole community. I could mention this really quickly about SUU. We have a program called Let's Talk, where counselors are just available for kind of short consultations without needing to go through all the challenges of getting in to see a regular counselor in a regular way, filling out all that paperwork and stuff, which can be kind of a pain. What I've noticed with Let's Talk, and other counselors at our center have noticed this too, a lot of students that come to Let's Talk and want and need and can really benefit from a 15 or 20-minute consultation are students that have been really distressed and are really struggling because they're taking care of or really trying to support students with more serious mental health issues on campus. And this has a big impact on them. And a lot of times they don't know the impact that has until they've been really trying to help out a roommate or a friend, and they've been doing it for weeks. They've been doing it for weeks and even months. And then they themselves get really, really tired. And so I just wanted to pull that idea into this idea of the economic impact of mental health on college campuses generally and at SUU specifically. When we have members of our community that are underprivileged and who are struggling with, and that translates into mental health issues or other developmental issues, it impacts everybody. It impacts their peers. It impacts how well-designed systems at the university work. It makes it harder for them to work well, and so it impacts everybody.
That makes sense, that ripple effect. And I guess you kind of covered that in your description about how student mental health relates to academic outcomes, not just retention, but students stay in school, they come back to school next semester. What other areas of academic success is impacted by that?
Yeah, so we have some fun data just from the counseling center at SUU. About 50, this is really consistent for about 10 years now. Over 50% of the students that actually come to counseling and develop kind of go through the counseling process, over 50% say it has a positive impact on their academic performance. And helps them stay in school. So that's a pretty tangible outcome right there. We know from national data and several research projects that there's a clear increase in GPA for students that are accessing counseling services. So we know that there's kind of a pretty clear improvement in academic performance as students' mental health gets better, which seems kind of obvious. I mean, it seems to make a lot of sense, right? But I don't know. I think that's an important message to get out. If you're a healthier, happier person, more flexible person, especially psychologically and cognitively more flexible, which is one of the outcomes that counseling tends to produce for most people that go to counseling, you're going to do better in almost every aspect of your life. And by the way, I'm a big fan of counseling. Big surprise. I'm a big fan of counseling. We do have good research that counseling has excellent long-term impact for people. If you come to counseling and counseling's hard, right? Like counseling kind of can kick your butt sometimes, and it takes some energy to do counseling. But we know that individuals that access counseling and can engage in counseling have really good long-term impacts that last for years and years. So that's why I'm a big fan of it.
Such a compelling case for addressing your mental health.
Yeah,
absolutely. And kind of what I've seen with that as working with students as a peer is basically every student that comes to me as a peer and wants to meet is they are experiencing stress over their grades. They're worried about it because they're not doing as well as they want to. And a lot of what the peers do is we try to get students connected with different resources to help them with various areas of stress in their life. And one of the ones that I personally haven't done very much with is grades, because there's like, I can get them in touch with resources like for tutoring and stuff like that, but they're already usually aware of those resources. So I try to help them more with the other stressors in their life. And as those stressors go away, they tell me that their grades are improving by themselves. So, or not by themselves, but that as they're losing stress in other areas of their life, the stress over the grades is going away because they're able to work more effectively in their classes. And so, yeah, mental health is so important for your grades. If you want to do well in school, take care of yourself. Mm-hmm. And it'll all become easier, which can be hard to do because sometimes when you have organic chemistry and you're focused on spending all day, every day, trying to get that information into your head, but you're so stressed that none of it's staying, it's counterproductive. So you got to take time to take care of yourself, and that'll make it easier for you to succeed in your grade. So.
Absolutely. I appreciate you mentioning those experiences as a peer. And I want to make a shout out for two things here. One is the importance of limits that human beings have. And well, I'll just address that real fast. One of the big developmental tasks of college, of people 18 to 24 years old, is recognizing that you can't do everything, right? Like you have limits in energy, you have limits in time, and trying to like, get your hand around that, understand yourself well enough so you recognize your limits when you run into them, and then developing creative and effective ways to manage your health and your mental health and your physical health and other needs that you have. And there's just limits sometimes. So I wanted to make a shout out about that. The other thing that I think is really important is relationships are critically important for human beings. And there is something, like there's lots of self-help books out there. There's lots of great apps. There's lots of great resources on the internet that all talk about mental health and developmental health and physical health and academic health. Those things are all great, right? Like we can learn lots of information from those. At least the good ones are great. But we can really spend some time in those areas and learn lots of things and develop new habits and good skills that way. But there is something really important especially during certain types of developmental tasks that we're engaged with, and when we're distressed. It is important to have a relationship with somebody, whether it's a roommate or a professor or a counselor or a family member. Relationships are wonderful catalysts to our personal development. And without them, we are not as flexible. We are not as skilled. And oftentimes our blind spots will really get in our way. We need relationships to have, I don't know, to deal with the tasks of development that all of us have to kind of face as we move through life. So I think SUU is a pretty good place to develop good relationships. I don't know, maybe that's a message, kind of a take-home message for folks, is developing good relationships, having quality relationships, and being able to reach out and feel entitled to a healthy relationship when you need one is pretty important as you just go through all of these developmental and stressful tasks of being a college student. So I don't know if that's where you wanted to go.
Oh, yeah.
That just popped into my mind, so I thought I'd say it.
Yeah.
No, and it makes sense. That's awesome.
So maybe in the last few minutes, what do you think is maybe the most important? What do you want to end with? What's the last part that you maybe want to highlight?
Good question. Let's see. I think that I'm just looking at my notes really fast. Okay, a couple of thoughts, maybe to wrap up with. That question is still out there. I think, and we'll see it for several more years. Is why does distress seem to be increasing among college students? And is it increasing? And I think yes, it is increasing. Well, and I think there's another question too, is I think people my age and older than me, who maybe had a lot more stigma around mental health, right? Like we were far less, my generation was far less likely to reach out for help than I think Generation Z is, for example. I think that's a good thing. I think it's a good thing. I think stigma is a lot less than it used to be. I think that that even though the developmental and psychological tasks that my generation dealt with aren't a whole lot different than the developmental tasks that younger people have today to deal with, that there's not a lot of difference. We mentioned a few of the differences earlier, but there's so much. I think people today are so much more likely to take their health seriously, and there's just not so much stigma around asking for help. And so I think it's a good thing to ask for help. I think it's challenging for systems that have been run a certain way for years and years and years to adjust to that. But I think students and people who are just growing and developing in life need to keep talking about this issue and need to keep asking for resources and services, because it's going to benefit everybody in the long run. I did want to mention this really quickly, and this goes back to privilege. We know from the data that that there are groups in our communities, groups of individuals that struggle a lot more and have a lot more barriers to being healthy. And I just wanted to throw this out. And there still may be a lot of stigma for some of these groups in accessing services, but we know that that first generation students struggle more than students who've had their parents go to college. We know that queer students struggle more. We know that Black students and Latinx students struggle more. Native American students struggle more. And we know generally that women struggle more in college settings than Caucasian males struggle. And that has nothing to do with anything inherent in these individuals. It is because the system is stacked against them. And I know people hear a lot about this, and I know there's pushback, there's backlash against this sort of talk in our culture, but the system is not set up particularly well for some individuals, and it translates into psychological distress. And I think all of us need to take account for that. We're all responsible for that, and we'll all do better in the long run if everybody is healthier, right? So kind of that idea of a rising tide lifts all boats. I think that's very much some of the big challenges in higher ed that we need to face over the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah, we belong to each other.
Yeah.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Anything else you want to say in closing? I mean, I think that definitely covered what I hoped students to hear and learn. But
no, not really. I think it was a fun discussion, and there's, some of the challenges of increasing resources and just creating a healthier community. These are big, difficult, complex questions, right? So there aren't simple answers to these things. So I don't know. I think we all need to be patient, but passionate at the same time.
Yeah.
Thank you so much, Kurt. This really has been a great conversation, and I think one of the big things that I've taken from it is, and maybe this goes a bit to reduce stigma as well, is that we need to all acknowledge that it's normal for people to be struggling sometimes. It's normal to have stress, and it's normal to ask for help.
Yes. Yeah, I really appreciate that. That's how community should work, right? Like, we're here for each other, and reach out and ask for help.
Yeah.
And when you're doing good, offer help to other people.
Yeah, absolutely. That is a cool thing about. It was one of the reasons I've stayed at SUU so long, I think, and enjoy the work here is there really is a good, strong sense of community generally at this school, and it's fun to be part of that. I think people are happy to help when they're asked for help.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I just want to echo that too. Thank you, Kurt, so much for being here. Kurt makes it look easy, but for those of you that maybe don't know, it's not easy to take data and then translate it into this lens that takes into account the systemic approach, and then just our unique cultural our cultural state and just our own unique university. And so I think, because I had read the study and I didn't have a third of those implications that you came up with. So so we're lucky to have that insight, because I think it's important that we look at what's working and what's not. And like you said, Tyler, just accessing help and normalizing this idea around just being a human and some of the barriers that we all face. And so thank you for that so much. I got a lot out of this myself, and I know our viewers will. So
cool. Thanks so much.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you, and thanks for watching, T-Birds, and good luck out there.
Okay.